All right, well, let's open with a word of prayer. And you turn me down just a little bit. I'm getting a ringing kind of I don't know if it's bouncing off the walls or what, but I'm hearing myself 3 times. It's a weird sensation. It's bad enough I have to hear myself once, let alone 3 times. All right, let's open with a word of prayer. We'll be in Genesis 41 tonight. Father, we do thank you for the day. We thank you for the blessings that you have given us. And Lord, as we study your word tonight, we ask that you would give us your wisdom. Help us to see and understand those things that we need and learn to apply them in a way that would draw us closer to you. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Genesis chapter 41, Joseph, last week, Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream. Not only did he tell Pharaoh what his dreams meant, but he told Pharaoh what to do about it. There was going to be 7 years of plenty where they had bumper crops, and then there would be 7 years of famine like they had never seen before. And so Joseph said, what you need to do is find somebody who's smart and who's wise, and you need to store during those 7 years, you need to take 20% of all the grain that is harvested, all the crops that are harvested, you need to store it up against those 7 years of famine. So if you think about it, they're consuming all the 80% and they're storing 20%, which means, let's assume they're able to grow 20% of what they normally would have in those famine years, because even in the famine years in the Nile Delta and places like that, they would still be able to grow crops because the Nile River is still going to provide water for them. So let's say they grow 20% of their normal crops and they've stored 20%. That means they still, for 7 years, only have less than half of the food available that they would normally have. So that's a big deal, especially in an agrarian society. And it's not like they can import it from, India or something like that, someplace where there's not a famine. They didn't have the technology to do that. And so it was a big deal. And so Pharaoh is so impressed with Joseph, not only him being able to correctly interpret the dream, but to give a solution, that he makes Joseph second in command. He makes Joseph, puts Joseph in charge of this project, and basically says, I'm turning Egypt over to you, and only in the throne will I be greater. So I'm the only one who can overrule you from the throne, but you do whatever you think is best. And this has been the pattern of Joseph's life. Joseph was kind of given charge over things by his dad to oversee his brothers, even though he was the youngest of the 10. He oversaw them, basically. In slavery at Potiphar's house, he oversaw Potiphar's house, and he had the rule of the place. In prison, he ran the prison. The jailer was the only one more powerful. So he was used to being the number 2 guy everywhere he went, because he was just such a godly young man, and God was with him, and God blessed him, that God put him in that number 2 position everywhere he went. He is literally, at this moment, in Genesis chapter 41, he has gone from an inmate in Pharaoh's jail to the second most powerful man in the world. That's pretty incredible. And only God can do something like that. And so let's pick it up. We'll kind of get back into it where we left off in chapter 41. Verse 41 says, And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried before him, Bow the knee. And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, and he gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. We mentioned that the Egyptian name means treasury of the glorious rest. And he's now married, 30 years old. He now has a wife, and he's a very powerful man all of a sudden. And imagine waking up that day in a jail cell and then going to bed that night in the palace. That's pretty cool. Verse 46, and Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. So Joseph goes on a tour to spread the news about what's coming and what they need to be doing. He begins to have probably a very large contingency of staff that he'd go into certain of the major regions and major areas, and his staff would scout out, where do we put the granaries? How much room do we need to store all this stuff? Who's going to build it? All these kind of things. And so he does what a good leader does. He doesn't sit in the office and just manage. He goes out and he sees everything for himself. He sees what he's dealing with. He sees the land. He sees the people. He lets everyone know what's going on. He is a very wise ruler and leader. And Pharaoh was wise to get out of his way and just let him do it. Verse 47 says, and in the 7 plenteous years, the earth brought forth by handfuls. And he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities, the food of the field, which was round about every city, he laid up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea, very much, until he left numbering, for it was without number. So, I mean, again, these crops are abnormally large, and Joseph's original plan, which I think they probably stuck with, was to take 1/5 or 20% of all of that. So let's say you're getting 125%, that 20% is bigger than it would normally be anyway. And Joseph, they just stopped tallying the grain. It was coming in so fast and furious that it was just impossible for them to calculate how much they were collecting. So they just stopped counting, which is pretty incredible. And they're going to need every bit of that food in the coming 7 years after that. Verse 50, and unto Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, which Asenath, the daughter of Potipherah, priest of On, bare unto him. And Joseph called the name of the first Manasseh, for God, said he, hath made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second called he Ephraim, for God had caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Manasseh literally means causing to forget, and Ephraim literally means double ash heap. I don't know the total significance of that, but it was because he was fruitful in the land. Maybe it was because his troubles had turned to ashes. I don't know. But those are his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And these 2 kids are born during the 7 good years before the famine came. So now, that's all good, and it's all dandy. Joseph has kids. He's got power. The food's coming in. It's being stored. Everything's going great. And then verse 53 hits. And the 7 years of plenteous that was in the land of Egypt were ended. I wonder how much of a weight that was in the mind of Joseph, that if God sent this dream, and doubling the dream, that was God's way of emphasizing how important this situation was, how important how dire this circumstance would be, that God would give Pharaoh 2 dreams that mean the same thing, so that Pharaoh would know this is a big deal. We're not messing around here. And I wonder how much of that weighed on Joseph during those 7 years. When they were storing up corn, I wonder if there wasn't just this constant feeling of, is it enough? Is it enough? Is it enough? Am I doing enough? Should we do more? Should we collect more? Should we build more? I mean, you got 7 years where the first year they probably had more crops than at the 7th year of famine, and that as the famine set in deeper and deeper, it became harder and harder. Pools of water and sources of water would begin to dry up during the drought that they were experiencing. So, the first year, it's not like it was like bumper crop and then the next year it was a dust bowl. But you can imagine that as the man put in charge of this, I just picture him every night calculating in his head how many granaries were stuffed full, and him saying, Lord, is it enough? Do I need to do more? Is it enough? It's going to get bad. Is it enough? So, while he had power and he had kids and all of that stuff, he also carried a great burden. I think Joseph was a man who cared. And I think he wasn't content just to say, well, I know I'm going to eat well, because the last two people in Egypt that will starve to death are me and Pharaoh. So I know I'm going to eat well. He said, there's a lot of people going to suffer, and it's going to get real bad, and I wonder if I'm doing enough. So, on one hand, he had this great blessing that God gave him. On the other hand, he carried the fate of nations in his hand. So it's not all wonderful. It's not all ease and just, Joseph getting pampered, getting a mani and a pedi every couple of days. He's carrying the survival of the nation, and he's carrying the reputation of God. Because if he messes it up, he makes God look bad. So he's carrying a very heavy load, and I think we can often overlook that and not realize what a burden Joseph had to have had on him, and how that may have affected him physically. He's 30 when he interprets the dream. Let's say he's 37 or 38, depending on the timing of when the 7 years start and end. He's 37, 38 years old, but for 7 years, things have been really good, and I'm sure he's been eating really well and all that, but for 7 years, he's carrying a heavy burden. You can imagine when the 7 years of plenty ended, as it says here in verse 53, you kind of wonder, you watch our presidents age, from the time they enter office to the time they leave office, and they look like they've aged 25 years. You kind of wonder if, as the years of famine started to set in, if Joseph didn't experience some of the same fatigue, some of the same, some of that same pressure. Because I think he cared. I honestly think he cared, and I think he did it to preserve life. I don't think he did it just so he would make sure he survived. He did it to make sure the nation would survive, and other nations. And so verse 54 says, and the 7 years of dearth began to come, according as Joseph had said. And the dearth was in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So this drought that came about was not limited to Egypt. It was in the regions surrounding Egypt. So what Egypt would have called the known world, or their actual reach and sphere of influence, it was everywhere. It was in Canaan. It was in other parts of Africa around Egypt. But in Egypt, they had food because they had listened to Joseph. There was bread there because the Lord provided that bread. And it kind of makes you think of the Lord when he said, I am the bread of life. And so verse 55 says, and when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried unto Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, go unto Joseph, what he saith to you do. So, these people are not dumb. So not only is the government storing food, I'm sure a lot of these people were storing food. It would have been a natural thing to do, is store food. They would have done a lot of the canning and storing and things like that, because you just couldn't count on going to the Walmart and finding everything you need. So, if you're a farmer, why wouldn't you keep your own crops so that you have wheat through the next season, and you have barley and whatever else they were growing to make sure that they had that. And so the first year probably went kind of okay, like, it's dry, the crops aren't doing real well. It's a good thing we've got food. But then their reserves ran out. The private stocks all started to run out. And they came to Pharaoh and they said, we need food. And he said, don't talk to me, talk to Joseph. This is not I'm just Pharaoh. You need to get this from Joseph. In verse 56, and the famine was over all the face of the earth. And again, it doesn't mean the entire globe was suffering a drought at the same time. What it means is that region and the known world to them, as far as they knew, it was everywhere. It wasn't like across the Mediterranean and Italy and Spain, things were great. It was a very large regional drought. It makes you wonder who was driving SUVs then to cause the climate change. Just a question. The famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians, and the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. Now, this was not a welfare program. They're selling this, okay? It makes sense to sell this stuff because it attaches a value to that resource that means it's going to get to where it needs to be. You're not going to waste. People waste what's free. They don't waste what they have to pay for very often. And so they open the storehouses. Maybe this is in the second year. Maybe it's all the way into the third year. We don't know. At some point in this famine, people's private stock runs out, and they start selling what they've stored for 7 years. And it says at the end of verse 56, the famine waxed sore in all the land of Egypt. It kept getting worse. Verse 57, and all the countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because that the famine was sore in all the land. So, again, word gets around, hey, the only place you can find food is in Egypt. Okay? Now, it's important for me to note that the Scripture is recording these events and using the name Joseph because that's how you would write the narrative. The Egyptians did not call him Joseph. Pharaoh gave him an Egyptian name. That's the name they used. Okay? So Pharaoh didn't say, go to Joseph. Pharaoh said, go to Zaphnath-Paneah, because that's what they called him. We call him Joseph, so the Bible records it that way. So it's important because in chapter 42, Joseph's brothers are going to come, and they're going to say, hey, who do we talk to? And they're not going to say, hey, this Hebrew guy Joseph is who you need to go talk to. They're going to say, Zaphnath-Paneah is the guy you need to talk to. He's the vice pharaoh, and he's the guy who decides who gets and who doesn't. So you need to go talk to him. All right? So that's important to know, that Pharaoh didn't call him Joseph. The Egyptians didn't call him Joseph. Okay? That wasn't his name in Egypt. It's his name to us, but not in Egypt. Okay, chapter 42 says, and when Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said unto his sons, why do you look one upon another? Why are you standing here looking at each other? These not so bright looks on your faces. And he said, behold, I have heard. I find the Bible just entertaining, don't you? I mean, it's enjoyable. You know, don't read it like a textbook. These are real people. So when Jacob says, why do you look one upon another? He's saying, why are you standing around looking at each other with a dumb look on your face? Go do something about it, you know. That's how we would say it today, all right? And he said, behold, I have heard there is corn in Egypt. Get you down thither and buy for us from thence, that we may live and not die. And Joseph's 10 brethren went down to buy corn in Egypt. But Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob sent not with his brethren, for he said, lest peradventure mischief befall him. So Benjamin is the youngest son of Jacob. He's the last son, Joseph being the only other son of his favorite wife, Rebecca. I had to think Rachel, Rebecca. Get them in the right order. My dyslexia is like totally kicked in right now. So now I'm like questioning, who's Jacob's wife? Rachel. Okay. Yeah, Rebecca was Isaac's wife. Yeah, it's fun being dyslexic and tired at the same time. So Benjamin and Joseph are full brothers, Rachel being their mother. Rachel died in childbirth with Benjamin. So the wife that he loved and worked for has died. The eldest son of the wife that he worked for and loved, he thinks is dead. And so the youngest and only surviving part of Rachel he had left, he's not letting out of his sight. Okay, he is still grieving. This has been 25 plus years that he has been grieving. And he is still a broken man. And we will see that eventually as we go through the scripture. And so verse 3 says, Joseph's 10 brethren went down to buy corn in Egypt. But Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob sent not with his brethren, for he said, lest peradventure mischief should befall him. And the sons of Israel came to buy corn among those that came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. And Joseph was the governor over the land, and he it was that sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brethren came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. And Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them, but made himself strange unto them, and spake roughly unto them. And he said unto them, Whence come ye? And they said, From the land of Canaan, to buy food. So Jacob sends the 10 brothers that sold Joseph into slavery, and they show up into Egypt to buy food. And Joseph is there at the market, overseeing things, and he sees his brothers. He recognizes them. They're dressed in Hebrew garments. They can speak that language and all of that. And so they come in. Joseph recognizes them, but they don't recognize him, which is understandable. Joseph had a shaved head. He was dressed like an Egyptian in whatever he was particularly wearing that day, and the types of makeup that often they would use when they were royalty and stuff like that, having the shaved head, speaking Egyptian with all of the other Egyptians that were around. And it would be very clear why they would not recognize him, because he probably looked nothing like the 17-year-old boy they sold into slavery 25 plus years ago. And of course, that would be the last place they would expect to find their brother that they sold into slavery, is the guy that's running the whole show. The guy that every Egyptian doesn't want to get on the bad side of. So, so then he speaks roughly to them. He's very curt with them. Where'd you come from? Well, from the land of Canaan. And it says in verse 8, And Joseph knew his brethren, but they knew not him. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them, and said to them, Ye are spies, to see the nakedness of the land are ye come. And so go back to verse 6, the last half of verse 6 for a second. And Joseph's brethren came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. Then you jump to verse 9. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them. Okay, so the first dream was that the 10 sheaves of his brothers bowed down to him. And they did. Dream 1, check. He had to have had a smile on his face when he was standing there, and they bowed down to him, and he said, Oh, yeah, I remember that dream. Mm-hmm. You guys are spies, aren't you? And this is what you call giving them the business. Ye are spies, to see the nakedness of the land ye are come. And they said unto him, Nay, my lord, but to buy food are thy servants come. We are all one man's sons, we are true men, thy servants are no spies. And he said unto them, Nay, but to see the nakedness of the land ye are come. And they said, Thy servants are 12 brethren, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan, and behold, the youngest this day is with our father, and one is not. If I was Joseph, I would have said, Not what? He's not what? And Joseph said unto them, That is it that I spake unto you, saying, Ye are spies. Hereby ye shall be proved. By the life of Pharaoh ye shall not go forth hence, except your youngest brother come hither. Send one of you, and let him fetch your brother, and ye shall be kept in prison, that your words may be proved, whether there be any truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh surely ye are spies. So Joseph, I guess, wanted to make sure his youngest brother was okay, so he said, I'm going to put 9 of you in jail. I'm going to let one of you go, and by the life of Pharaoh, if I don't see that other brother, none of you are leaving here. Well, that's a problem. Dad hasn't let Benjamin out of his sight. And again, Benjamin is in his late 20s by now, maybe 30 years old by now. And Dad still's like, No, you're too young to drive. No, you can't have a motorcycle. Verse 17, and he put them all together in ward 3 days. He threw them in jail for 3 days. Probably having a little bit of fun at this point. You know, it's not a pit, but it'll do. I wonder if he put him in the same jail cell he got thrown into when Potiphar falsely accused him, or Potiphar's wife falsely accused. I wonder if he picked that particular ward. You know, he could have been there looking at the walls. Joseph was here, you know. Joseph said, verse 18, Joseph said unto them the third, I love this story. I just love this story. I find a lot of humor in it. And if I were Joseph, I'd be having the time of my life right now. And he's a humble man, but he's milking this. I mean, there's no way to, he's getting some pleasure out of this one. Verse 18, Joseph said unto them the third day, This do and live, for I fear God. If ye be true men, let one of your brethren be bound in the house of your prison. Go ye, carry corn for the famine of your houses, but bring your youngest brother unto me. So shall your words be verified, and ye shall not die. And they did so. So Joseph said, after 3 days, Joseph came and said, I've thought this over a little bit, and I'm going to make a deal with you. One of you stays here. The other 9 can go. I'm going to let you buy food. You can take the food with you. Feed your family. But the next time you come back, if you don't have your youngest brother, nothing. And they said, okay, we'll take that deal. And, who wants to stay behind, take one giant step forward. Verse 21, and they said one to another, we are verily or truly guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us. It's amazing how people know when God is. I always say, if you have to ask if God's chastening you, then he's not chastening you. Because when he takes you to the woodshed and he starts lighting you up, you know what is happening and you know why it's happening. I knew why I got every spanking I ever got. I knew exactly why. My parents read me my Miranda rights. You are under arrest for, and I'm fixing to punish you. And I never had to say, why am I getting a spanking? I knew. And they said, when Joseph was begging to be let out of that pit and we didn't listen, this is why this is happening. And they're right. It's not God doing it to them, though. It's Joseph. Joseph says, can I have a little fun first, Lord? Verse 22, and Reuben answered them, saying, Spake I not unto you? See, I told you so. Saying, do not sin against the child, and you would not hear. Therefore, behold, also his blood is required. Reuben said, I told you not to do anything to him. You idiots sold him into slavery, and now this is happening. I'm not staying behind. Verse 23, and they knew not that Joseph understood them, for he spake unto them by an interpreter. So they're over there speaking in Hebrew, and he's standing there listening to every word they say, knows every word that they're saying, and every time he speaks to them, he speaks Egyptian. The Egyptian interprets into Hebrew. They have no idea he knows exactly what he's saying. He's probably getting a thrill out of this. I would be. I mean, who wouldn't be in Joseph's position and not just be like, you got to have something wrong with you not to be enjoying this. I'm enjoying it, and I didn't have any part in this. I'm getting a kick out of it. Verse 24, and he turned himself about from them and wept, and returned to them again and communed with them, and took from them Simeon and bound him before their eyes. So, I think he's tender-hearted enough that, he knows that God had a plan for his life and that everything that he suffered and went through was for this moment. He knows that. But at the same time, he hasn't seen his family in 25 years. He hasn't seen his dad in 25 years. His grandfather has died, and he never got to see him again. His mom has died. He's missed out on a lot. He wasn't there growing up with his younger brother. And the brothers seem to have an understanding that this sin has come back to haunt them. And so, this is an emotional moment that it's no wonder that he wept. But verse 25 says, Then Joseph commanded to fill their sacks with corn, and to restore every man's money into his sack, and to give them provision for the way, and thus did he unto them. And they laded their asses with the corn and departed thence. So Joseph commanded his men to not only give them all the food that they bought, but give them their money back, hide it in their sacks, don't let them know about that, and give them provisions for the trip back to Canaan and turn them loose, which is more than they did for him. Verse 27, and as one of them opened his sack to give his ass provender in the inn, he espied his money, for behold, it was in his sack's mouth. So they stop and, time to feed the animals, so they open up the sacks, and one of the sacks, and gonna, feed the donkeys and mules and whatever else they got carrying in their caravan. And, Verse 28, and he said unto his brethren, My money is restored, and lo, it is even in my sack. And their heart failed them. And they were afraid, saying one to another, What is this that God hath done unto us? They thought, oh no, we stole this corn. We didn't intend, but they're going to think we stole this corn. And when we come back, they're going to know that we stole this corn, and they're going to throw us in jail. I mean, this guy already doesn't like us, and now the cashier made a mistake and forgot to debit our card, and now we're in trouble. Too late to turn back. Verse 29, and they came unto Jacob their father unto the land of Canaan, and told him all that befell unto them, saying, The man who is the Lord of the land spake roughly to us, and took us for spies of the country. And we said unto him, We are true men, we are no spies, but we are 12 brethren, sons of our father. One is not, and the youngest is this day with our father in the land of Canaan. And the man, the Lord of the country, said unto us, Hereby shall I know that ye are true men. Leave one of your brethren here with me, and take food for the famine of your households, and be gone, and bring your youngest brother unto me. Then shall I know that ye are no spies, but that ye are true men. So will I deliver you your brother, and ye shall traffic in the land. And it came to pass, as they emptied their sacks, that behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when both they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob their father said unto them, Me have ye bereaved of my children. Joseph is not, and Simeon is not, and you will take Benjamin away. All these things are against me. And Reuben spake unto his father, saying, Slay my 2 sons, if I bring him not to thee. Deliver him into my hand, and I will bring him to thee again. And he said, My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. If mischief befall him by the way in which ye go, then shall ye bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. Jacob said, You're not taking him. If anything happens to Benjamin, it'll kill me. This is how broken up Jacob is. They, for 25 years, have seen their father in a perpetual state of grief over their brother who Dad thinks is dead. They know that he wasn't dead last time they saw him, that he could be alive. They have no idea what happened to him, and they really have no way of undoing this now. And Jacob says, I don't care, we'll starve to death. I'm not letting Benjamin go. I would rather starve to death here as a family than let Benjamin go, because I couldn't take it if anything happened. So Joseph's done a good deed by giving them their money back. He's basically given them free food. He's done them a blessing, and God has used the goodness that Joseph has shown to his brothers to heap coals of fire upon their head. Isn't that great? what we're supposed to do. Getting revenge isn't going to be nearly as satisfying as doing good to those who do you wrong and letting God turn the knife in their back. He is so much better at it than you and I. And that's where Joseph's brothers are in this. So I'm going to quit there. Just it's a good stopping point versus trying to get through chapter 43. So we'll just stop there. Any questions? Yeah, you have to wonder if after being promoted, Joseph didn't look up Potiphar and have a conversation with him. I don't think Joseph was the kind of man that lorded his power over people, but Potiphar may have come crawling on his hands and knees. Potiphar may have been dead by that time. I don't know. Joseph was in prison for a number of years. Potiphar could have died. Potiphar's not important enough to the story that he's ever mentioned again. But yeah, you do have to wonder if Potiphar came groveling, worried that Joseph was going to take vengeance on him. I don't think Joseph did or would have, even if he had the opportunity to do so. But yeah, maybe to set the record straight. Your wife's a liar, and now that I'm vice pharaoh, I can tell you that. And there's nothing you can do about it, son. No, it just kind of meant he was, for all intents and purposes, Egyptian. Yes, and it probably was for, in the eyes of the people, to disguise his Hebrew heritage. If he was going to rule over them and not being royal blood, this Hebrew slave turned prisoner, turned your boss, that wouldn't have gone over well. So probably to pass him off as Egyptian. He spoke Egyptian, had an Egyptian name, so it would have been probably very easy to pass him off as an Egyptian by changing his name. So, Doug? Yes. Yeah, and whether Joseph thought of that beforehand or thought of it afterward, I think he probably thought of it beforehand. I think he was probably too kind-hearted of a person to turn away everybody who wasn't Egyptian. But at the same time, the fact that they were open for business meant that his family would eventually come to him. If everybody knew going to Egypt and asking for food is a death sentence, then we don't get this story to play out the way God intended it to. So, Bill? Yeah, they would not be getting the resident discount. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Joseph makes Pharaoh the wealthiest man in the world. At the end of this famine, Pharaoh literally owns the country. Literally owns the country. When the money runs out, they start selling their land. And so Joseph buys all the land of Egypt in exchange for food, and then the people then are working what used to be their land for Pharaoh, and Pharaoh takes 20% off the top. So Pharaoh literally controls the country. He owns the country at the end of this. By the way, from history, there's a high likelihood that the Pharaoh he interpreted the dream for actually died during the 7 plenteous years, and there was a different Pharaoh by the time you get to the end. So just based on some historical things. It's very likely that between the dream interpretation and the end of the 7 years of famine, that the actual Pharaoh that he interpreted the dream for had died, and a new Pharaoh was actually on the throne. So a little interesting side note, too. It wasn't necessarily the same Pharaoh. The other thing that this will do is set up, not only do Joseph's family come into, all right, let me explain geography to you in Egypt. Upper Egypt is the southern part of Egypt, and Lower Egypt is the northern part because the Nile River flows north, okay? So when you're reading and they talk about Upper Egypt, they're talking about the south. And when they talk about Lower Egypt, they're talking about the north, because that's how the rivers flow downhill. They don't flow uphill. Hopefully you knew that. And so where Joseph's family settles is considered Lower Egypt, in that Nile Delta, what they would call Goshen, in that area. But Joseph's family are not the only foreigners that settle. A lot of other foreigners settle in that area because that's where food is. And there's a migration to Lower Egypt during the time of famine, which would lead to, between the end of the book of Genesis and the beginning of book of Exodus, if you look at the first chapter of Exodus, there's a little genealogy there of everybody that is there. And then verse 8 says, "Now there rose a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph." Okay, and there's some things at play, but what happened historically between the end of the book of Genesis and Joseph dying and the beginning of the book of Exodus, in which we now have a ruler over Egypt who doesn't have any respect for or knowledge of Joseph. Knew not tends to mean more, doesn't mean like he never heard of him so much as he didn't have any respect for him. Okay, it's like when God says, "Depart from me, I know you not." It's not like God doesn't know who you are. It's not an informational thing. It's a relationship thing. This king had no relationship to Joseph. Okay, so what happened after Joseph died, there was a point in time when a group of people that the Egyptians call the Hyksos, it just means foreigner, they actually rose up and threw off Pharaoh's power. Pharaoh's domain was more in Upper Egypt, which is in the south, and they kind of declared an independent state. And they actually, for a while, had subdued Upper Egypt, and these foreigners were running Egypt for a while. And then the 18th dynasty with Pharaoh Ahmose that came up, he reconquered the land and he reestablished Egyptian control. And his dynasty was a very powerful dynasty. This is the dynasty that brings in Moses. Moses is the family name of this dynasty. So his name Moses links him to that dynasty. And so you say, well, how could Egypt forget the guy who saved their country? That's how. They were literally overthrown. The Egyptian royalty were all killed, and a new dynasty, of a new family of royalty rose up, had enough power to overthrow the Hyksos, drive the majority of them out, kill a lot of them. And so this dynasty became very distrustful of the foreigners living in their land, and they said, if we want to make sure they can't hurt us, then we better hurt them first. And so they enslaved them. And that's how you get from Joseph saving Egypt to Pharaoh and Egypt enslaving Joseph's family. That's how. And that's over a period of several hundred years. It's not there's a big gap between the two books as far as time goes. So, all right. Sherry? I don't know if there was any significance. Judah was the one who decided to sell him. Reuben was the one who was going to deliver him back to Dad, and they sold him while he wasn't looking. But Judah was the one who came up with the idea. So how Simeon was chosen, I don't know. I don't know if Joseph chose Simeon or they flipped a coin, drew straws, or if it was just kind of an eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I don't like you. Used to break my He-Man super dolls, so, you're staying. I don't know. Keith? Yeah, we wouldn't have 32 trillion in debt either if Joseph were 33 trillion in debt. Excuse me. We're racking it up faster than I can remember. So, we would be in a lot better shape if Joseph was running the place. We'd be in a lot better shape if Bozo the Clown was running the place, but it's just my opinion. All right. So by way of announcements, just question and answer time filled in that gap nicely. So tomorrow, I've got, for the owls that are coming, we've got just 2 cases of water we want to get labels on. That'll get us to where we want to have the right number of bottles to take. So we've left those and stocking you guys up just to do tabbing. And when the Thursday that I'm back is the Thursday that we can do bundling, and then I'll be here to take the pallet in and do all that with Brian. So tabbing and a few water bottles for tomorrow is on the agenda. And if you check out the map, I've updated the map. I talked to Brother Van Amen, and he gave me some zip codes that they have already done. So the whole southeastern corner of Columbus is all done. So I marked all those off and subtracted them, and so many thousand, tens of thousands more that have been mailed out already. They're getting ready to mail 30,000, and they're going to take a couple more of those southeastern zip codes. They're going to knock those out, and if they have enough left over, there's a zip code with 900 in it. And I said, if you got 900 left over, you could do that one too. So they're mailing in that area, and then we're mailing in this one zip code, and we've got about 14,000 and change, about 14,000 still to go in this zip code. So we have enough assembled and cut, I believe, to do the whole zip code, and then a little bit extra. So I was excited. We're down to like 450,000 homes to go now in Franklin County. So that's like a relief to my soul that we're down to just a few more. But it's exciting to see that map filling up and see those zip codes clicking off. It's only been a year since we started mailing. Our first mailing was September 27th last year. So we're just coming up on 1 year. By the time I get back, we'll be just past that, doing our next pallet, and we'll be about 109,000 with the next pallet. So it's awesome. I'm excited. So, all right. So that's coming up. And then Friday's also the Fourth Friday Festival. If you're planning on coming to that, make sure Steve knows that. If you have any questions about when you're needed and that kind of stuff, please check with Steve on that. But we're looking forward to that. It's our last one of the year, and then we'll be putting all our Fourth Friday stuff away and wait until next June to get those back out. And then we got revival. Let's please make sure that we're praying for revival. Pray for God to do a work in your heart first. Make sure you're doing business with Him first. Lord, search me and try me. Know my thoughts. Know my heart. Do that first, and then continue to pray for God to do a mighty work in our church. I think this could be an exciting week and could be the start of some great things going on. So before we get into the prayer requests, I'll just say, they are going to be starting the sewer on Monday the 2nd, so a week from Monday. They are going to be starting that. We are going to just stay out of their way as much as possible to facilitate them getting out of our parking lot and off our property as quickly as possible. I don't want the work to drag in through the weekend because they constantly have people coming up here and they have to stop and wait for cars to come and go and things like that. So we're not going to have a service on the 4th, Wednesday the 4th. We are not going to have service, and that just keeps the kids out of here. It just, digging a trench that deep, there's no way to predict where they're going to be in it, and I just feel a lot safer and a lot better about us not being in the way and not even fooling around with it. We can't do anything to mess it up, cause some more work, delays, anything like that. So we're just going to let them get that done, and they've got it all staked out, and most of the stakes and things that you see are just control points for them to take measurements from. So just know that. But if you see any bright yellow ribbons or stakes or anything like that, just leave them alone. They're there for a reason. But we're excited about getting that, and we got our preliminary floor plan this weekend, and I was so excited because I got it Sunday. I talked to John Moore, our consultant, so we got the plan on Sunday. I talked to him on Monday. By Monday evening, we had the plan over to the civil engineer who had adjusted the site plan and sent it back to me and answered the 2 questions we had to have answered. He answered them same day, and it was like 6:30 at night Monday when he answered it. So I got back with John. Yes, we can do that. Today I got a couple options on the site plan. We're trying to move the annex as far that way as we can to open up more parking and just utilize more of the property, because it's kind of now or never. So how far can we push the limits is what we're doing. I got 3 options back for that. I have a conference call with them on Friday set up. John started the basic architectural drawings today, so we'll get an idea of what the roof line would look like and how we're going to do some of these things. And if we like it, then we're going to pedal to the metal, let's go. So very excited on all of that. A lot happened in like 2.5 days, where 2 weeks I sat there going, I need a floor plan, I need a floor plan. And then we went from floor plan to revised site plan to architectural drawings in 2 days. So praise the Lord, making up for lost time. So just continue to pray on that, and ask the Lord for wisdom as we move forward. So, all right, let's take a few